Clara's body slammed against the church doors. Inside, she could hear the congregation singing hymns about mercy and grace. "Please!" She pounded until her fists bled. "My son, he's burning with fever. Please!" The singing stopped. Footsteps approached. The door cracked open and a woman's face appeared cold, disgusted. "We don't help your kind here." The door slammed. The lock clicked. Clara sank to her knees in the snow, her dying child pressed against her chest, and screamed at a God who wasn't listening. If you've ever begged for help and been turned away, stay until the end. Subscribe and comment your city. Let's see how far Clara's story travels. Chatenda. The fever had started 3 days ago. Clara pressed her lips to Sammy's forehead and felt the heat radiating through his skin like coals buried in ash. His small body trembled against her chest. His breath came in shallow, rattling gasps that made her stomach clench with terror. "Mama." His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm so cold." "I know, sweet boy. I know." She pulled him tighter, wrapping her threadbare coat around both of them, trying to share warmth she didn't have. The stagecoach rattled and lurched over frozen ruts in the road. Every jolt sent pain shooting through her exhausted body. 17 cents. That's what she had left. 17 cents, a dying child, and a name that meant nothing in a territory where no one knew her. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe here, finally, she could disappear. Coldwater Creek. The driver's voice cut through the wind. End of the line. The stagecoach jerked to a stop. Clara gathered Sammy in her arms and stumbled toward the door, her legs stiff from hours of sitting in the cold. The driver didn't offer to help her down. Didn't look at her when he threw her single bag into the snow. His eyes had slid past her the moment she'd boarded in Cheyenne. A woman alone with a child, no wedding ring, no husband waiting at the destination. He knew what she was. They always knew. "Where's the doctor?" Clara's voice cracked. "Please, my son needs a doctor." The driver was already climbing back onto his seat. "Doc Coleman, end of Main Street past the church." He paused, his whip raised. "You got money to pay him?" Clara didn't answer. Couldn't. The whip cracked. The horses lurched forward. And Clara stood alone in a strange town, holding her burning child, watching the stagecoach disappear into the white. She found the doctor's house easily enough. A small wooden sign swung in the wind. E. Coleman, M.D. Clara pounded on the door. No answer. She pounded again harder until her frozen knuckles screamed. The door cracked open. A man in his 50s peered out, gray beard, tired eyes, suspicion carved into every line of his face. "What do you want?" "My son." Clara thrust Sammy forward. "He has a fever. 3 days. He won't eat. He barely drinks. Please, sir, please." The doctor's eyes moved from Sammy to Clara, to her bare ring finger, to the worn bag at her feet. "Where's your husband?" "I don't have one." Something shifted in the doctor's face, a door closing behind his eyes. "I'm sorry. I can't help you." "What?" Clara grabbed the doorframe. "He's 4 years old. He's dying. You're a doctor." "I'm a doctor with a practice to maintain." His voice was flat. "If I'm seen treating women like you, Mrs. Morrison would have my patients turning away within the week." "Who is Mrs. Morrison?" "Someone you don't want as an enemy." The doctor stepped back. "There's a boarding house on Main Street. Mrs. Patterson might take you in. She's not particular." "Please." The door closed in her face. Clara stood on the frozen porch, her son's labored breathing the only sound, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not particular. That's what she was now. Someone for people who weren't particular. "Mama." Sammy's voice was so weak she almost didn't hear it. "Why won't the man help us?" Clara couldn't answer. She picked up her bag and started walking. The boarding house was warm at least. Mrs. Patterson was a sharp-eyed widow in her 60s who looked Clara up and down, asked no questions, and pointed to a room at the top of the stairs. $2 a week, breakfast included. You cause trouble, you're out. I can work. Clara's voice was hoarse. I can sew, clean, cook. We'll talk about that after you've rested. Mrs. Patterson's gaze softened slightly as it fell on Sammy. The boy needs tending. There's hot water in the kitchen. Clean rags in the cupboard. You know how to break a fever? Yes, ma'am. Then do it. I'll bring up some broth. Clara carried Sammy upstairs, stripped off his sweat-soaked clothes, and bathed him with cool water until her arms ached. She forced sips of broth between his cracked lips. She sang the lullabies her mother had sung to her before the consumption took her, before Clara's world narrowed to survival and shame. Somewhere around midnight, Sammy's fever broke. Clara held him while he slept, listening to his breathing slowly steady, and wept with relief so intense it felt like drowning. The next 3 days passed in a blur of exhaustion and cautious hope. Sammy grew stronger. He started eating, started asking questions about where they were, why they'd come here, whether there were horses in this town. Maybe, Clara told him. We'll have to see. She found work quickly. Mrs. Patterson needed help with the laundry, and Clara threw herself into the labor with desperate gratitude. Her hands cracked and bled from the lye soap. Her back screamed from bending over wash tubs for hours. But it was honest work, and it paid, and it let her feed her son. That was enough. That had to be enough. On the 4th day, she ventured into town. The general store was small, but well-stocked. The shelves lined with flour and salt and coffee and all the things Clara couldn't afford but needed anyway. She gathered what she could pay for thread for mending a small bag of oats, a twist of hard candy for Sammy, and approached the counter. The shopkeeper took her money without meeting her eyes. "Thank you kindly," Clara said. He didn't respond. She was turning to leave when the door opened and a woman swept in like winter itself had taken human form. Silver hair, silk dress, eyes that cut like broken glass. The woman stopped when she saw Clara, looked her over with the kind of slow, deliberate assessment usually reserved for livestock. "Ah, you must be the woman everyone's been talking about." Clara's spine stiffened. "I'm Clara Whitfield, ma'am." "I know who you are." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Henrietta Morrison. My husband owns half this town." She stepped closer, and Clara caught the scent of expensive perfume. "I understand you're staying at the boarding house with your son." "Yes, ma'am." "And there's no husband?" It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am." Henrietta's smile widened. "I see. How unfortunate." Clara said nothing. She'd learned that silence was sometimes the only armor she had. "I'll be direct with you, Miss Whitfield." Henrietta's voice dropped, becoming almost intimate. "This is a respectable town, a Christian town. We have standards. And a woman in your condition, well, you understand." "I understand that I'm looking for honest work, ma'am. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" Henrietta laughed softly. "My dear, women like you are never looking for nothing more, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Stay out of sight, stay out of trouble, and perhaps we can coexist." Her eyes hardened. "Cross me, and you'll find that Coldwater Creek can be very cold indeed." She swept past Clara toward the counter, and the shopkeeper suddenly found his voice greeting her warmly, asking after her husband, her health, her opinions on the weather. Clara walked out into the bitter wind and told herself it didn't matter. She'd heard threats before, had survived worse than cold shoulders and cutting words. She would keep her head down, work hard, save money. Eventually, she'd move on, find somewhere better, somewhere that didn't exist. But she kept walking anyway. Sunday came, and Clara made the mistake of going to church. Sammy had been asking about God where he lived, why Mama sometimes prayed to him, whether he could hear them all the way out here in Wyoming. Clara didn't have good answers, but she remembered her own mother taking her to services, remembered the feeling of belonging to something larger than herself. Maybe Sammy deserved that. Maybe she did too. The church was already full when they arrived. Clara slipped into a back pew. Sammy pressed close against her side and tried to make herself invisible. The sermon was about the woman at the well, about sin and forgiveness and living water. Clara listened and felt the familiar ache of wanting to believe. After the service, she stood to leave. "Wait." The voice was sharp, carrying. Clara turned. Henrietta Morrison was pushing through the crowd toward her, trailed by a cluster of women in expensive dresses. "Ladies." Henrietta's voice rang out over the murmuring congregation. "I want you to meet Miss Whitfield. She's the woman who's been staying at the boarding house." She smiled that terrible smile. "The one with the illegitimate child." The word landed like a slap. Clara felt every eye in the church turn toward her, felt the weight of judgment settle on her shoulders like stones. "Mrs. Morrison," the pastor started. "I'm not finished." Henrietta's voice was silk and steel. "Miss Whitfield, perhaps you'd like to tell us about the boy's father. Where is he? Why isn't he here providing for his family?" Clara's face burned. Her hands shook, but she lifted her chin. "That's my business, ma'am, not yours." "Oh, but it is my business." Henrietta stepped closer. "When a woman of low moral character comes into my town, into my church, and sits beside my neighbor's children, that becomes everyone's business." "Mama," Sammy's small voice trembled. "Why is the lady yelling?" Clara looked down at her son, at his frightened eyes, his trembling lip. Something inside her snapped. "My son," she said quietly, "is 4 years old. He hasn't done anything wrong. Neither have I. I made a mistake once. A man I trusted lied to me and left me. That's my sin, and I've paid for it every single day since." She met Henrietta's eyes. "But I won't let you punish my child for my mistakes. He deserves better than that. We both do." The church was utterly silent. Henrietta's face twisted with fury. "You dare!" "Ma'am." A new voice, low, steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. Clara turned. A man was walking up the center aisle of the church. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair shot through with gray at the temples. He wore simple work clothes, dust still on his boots, and he moved with the kind of quiet authority that made people step aside without being asked. His eyes were the color of winter sky, and they were fixed on Henrietta Morrison. "I think that's enough." Henrietta's expression flickered surprise, maybe, or caution. "Mr. Hartley, this doesn't concern you." "I reckon it does." The man Hartley stopped a few feet from her. "You're standing in a church calling out a woman and her child for sport. Seems like something that ought to concern anyone with a conscience. This woman is a mother, a person, same as you." His voice was calm, but there was iron beneath it. "I don't know what she's done to earn your scorn, Mrs. Morrison, but I know what I'm seeing right now, and it ain't Christian." Henrietta's mouth opened, closed. Her face had gone pale with rage. "How dare you lecture me about—" "I ain't lecturing." Hartley turned to Clara, and his expression softened. "Ma'am, I apologize for what you've been put through today. This isn't what church ought to be." Clara stared at him. Her throat was too tight to speak. "You need a walk home," he said. "I'd be honored to escort you." "Don't you dare!" Henrietta's voice shook. "If you walk out with that woman, Silas Hartley, you're telling this whole town. I know exactly what I'm telling them." He offered Clara his arm. She looked at it, at him, at the crowd of faces watching with shock and hunger and something that might have been hope. She took his arm. They walked out together. The cold hit Clara like a wall, but she barely felt it. Her head was spinning. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought her ribs might crack. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have done that." "Probably not." The man Silas didn't slow down. "But I've been watching Margaret Morrison bully people for 20 years. I reckon I was due to say something." Henrietta. What? Her name is Henrietta, not Margaret. Silas glanced at her, and something like amusement flickered across his stern face. Right, sorry, I don't pay much attention to her. You will now. Clara pulled her arm free, stopping in the middle of the snowy street. You just made an enemy, a powerful one, for a stranger. Seemed like the right thing to do. The right thing? Clara laughed bitterly. There is no right thing, there's just survival, and you just made yours harder for no reason. Silas studied her. His gray eyes were steady, unreadable. What's your name? Does it matter? It matters to me. Clara hesitated. Clara. Clara Whitfield. Clara. He said it slowly, like he was testing the weight of it. I'm Silas Hartley. I've got a ranch about 5 miles outside town, horses mostly. Nobody to talk to but them. He paused. I came into town for supplies. Wasn't planning on starting a war. Well, you started one anyway. Guess I did. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Your boy, he all right? Clara blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. Yes, he's recovering. He was sick when we arrived. Doc Coleman turn you away. Her silence was answer enough. Silas's jaw tightened. Ezra's a good man, but he's scared of Henrietta. Everyone is. He looked back toward the church. That's the problem with this town. Good people too scared to be good. And you're not scared? Oh, I'm scared of plenty of things. He turned back to her. Just not her. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what to do with this strange, stubborn man who'd walked into a storm for her without a second thought. Mama! Sammy came running down the church steps, his small face bright with fear. Mama, are you okay? The mean lady was yelling. I'm fine, sweet boy. Clara caught him, lifting him into her arms. Everything's fine. Sammy peered at Silas over her shoulder. Who's that? This is Mr. Hartley. He helped us. Sammy studied Silas with the frank assessment only children possess. You have a nice face, he announced. You look like a horse. Clara's face went hot. Sammy! But Silas laughed, a real laugh, deep and warm, that transformed his weathered face entirely. That might be the nicest thing anyone's said to me in years. He crouched down to Sammy's level. You like horses, son? I've never touched one. I saw pictures once. Well, that ain't right. A boy ought to know horses. Silas glanced up at Clara. If your mama says that it's okay, you're welcome to come out to my ranch sometime. Meet some real ones. Sammy's eyes went wide. Can I, Mama, please? Clara looked at Silas, at this stranger who'd upended her careful invisibility, who'd made himself a target for her sake, who was now offering her son something she could never give him. She should say no, should retreat to the safety of suspicion. But Sammy was looking at her with such hope, and Silas was waiting with such patience. Maybe, she said. We'll see. Silas nodded like she'd given him a gift. That's fair. He straightened. I should let you get home, but Clara. He said her name like it meant something. You're not alone here, whatever Henrietta Morrison says, whatever this town tries to do. You've got at least one person on your side. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture so old-fashioned it made her chest ache, and walked away. Clara watched him go. She should be terrified. Everything she'd learned told her that kindness was a trap, that good intentions turned to dust, that men who seemed honorable always revealed their price eventually. But watching Silas Hartley disappear into the snow, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. And that scared her more than Henrietta Morrison ever could. The retaliation came faster than Clara expected. Monday morning she walked to the general store for flour. The door was locked. She knocked. Inside she could see George the shopkeeper moving behind the counter. Mr. George? She knocked again. The sign says you're open. He appeared in the window, wouldn't meet her eyes, mouthed a single word through the glass. "Sorry." Then he turned away. Clara stood on the frozen boardwalk, understanding settling over her like a shroud. Henrietta had made good on her threat. One by one, the businesses of Coldwater Creek would close their doors. She tried the butcher. Closed. The dry goods store. Closed. Even the small bakery at the end of Main Street, run by a young woman with flour-dusted hands and kind eyes. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered through a cracked door. "I truly am. But Mrs. Morrison, she said if anyone sells to you." "I understand." Clara's voice was hollow. "Thank you for explaining." The door closed. Clara walked back to the boarding house slowly, her empty bag hanging from her arm. Sammy was waiting with Mrs. Patterson, playing with a wooden spoon the older woman had given him. "Mama!" He ran to her. "Mrs. Patterson says we can have stew for dinner." Clara tried to smile. Failed. Mrs. Patterson took one look at her face and understood. The stores? All of them. The older woman's mouth tightened. "Damn that woman! Damn her straight to hell!" "Mrs. Patterson, don't." Mrs. Patterson held up a hand. "I've known Henrietta Morrison for 40 years. Watched her claw her way from nothing to everything and crush anyone who got in her way." Her eyes glittered. "But she doesn't own me, and she doesn't own this boarding house. She'll come for you next." "Let her try." Mrs. Patterson lifted her chin. "I've got enough supplies to last a month. After that, we'll figure something out. But you're not leaving Clara Whitfield. Not like this. Not because some bitter old woman decided you weren't worth Christian mercy." Clara's eyes burned. "Why are you helping me? You barely know me." "I know enough." Mrs. Patterson's voice softened. "I know you love that boy more than your own life. I know you work harder than anyone I've hired in 30 years, and I know what it's like to be judged for something you can't undo." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "Don't thank me yet." Mrs. Patterson turned back to the stove. "We've got a war to survive first." That evening, someone knocked on the boarding house door. Clara tensed. She'd been waiting for this, for Henrietta to show up with demands, with threats, with whatever weapon came next in her arsenal. But when Mrs. Patterson opened the door, it wasn't Henrietta. It was Silas Hartley. He stood on the porch snow, dusting his shoulders, his arms full of supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, dried meat. More food than Clara had seen in weeks. "Evening, ma'am." He nodded to Mrs. Patterson. "Heard there might be some folks here who could use provisions." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. "Hartley, I didn't think you came into town more than twice a year." "Special circumstances." His eyes found Clara standing frozen in the hallway. "Ma'am?" "You can't be here." Clara's voice came out strangled. "If Henrietta finds out, she already knows." Silas stepped inside, setting the supplies on the kitchen table. "Ran into her on my way through town. She made her position very clear." "And you came anyway?" "I don't take orders from Henrietta Morrison." He turned to face her. "Told you before, you're not alone here." Clara stared at him. At this impossible man who kept showing up, kept refusing to abandon her, kept acting like her existence mattered. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you keep doing this?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. 5 years ago, he said finally. "My father died. Winter like this one. He went out to check the horses and didn't come back. I found him in the snow half a mile from the house. Heart gave out." Clara's throat tightened. "The whole town came to the funeral, said all the right things, brought food, offered help." His jaw flexed. "But when the funeral was over, they went back to their lives, and I was alone, really alone, for a long time." He looked at her. "I know what it's like to feel invisible, to wonder if anyone would notice if you just disappeared." His voice roughened. And I decided a long time ago that if I ever saw someone else drowning the way I was, I wouldn't walk past. I couldn't. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. "I'm not a project," she said quietly. "I'm not someone you can fix. I know. I've got a past. A complicated, shameful past that... I don't care about your past." Silas took a step closer. "I care about who you are now. A mother who'd die for her son. A woman who stood up to Henrietta Morrison in front of the whole town. Someone who keeps fighting even when every door slams in her face." He was close now. Close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "I don't know what happened to you before," he said, "and I won't ask until you're ready to tell me, but I know what I see, and what I see is someone worth knowing." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Mr. Silas." Sammy's small voice broke the silence. He was standing in the doorway, clutching his wooden spoon. "Did you bring horses?" Silas blinked, stepped back. A smile crept across his face. "Not this time, son, but I've got something almost as good." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden horse carved with careful detail. Sammy's eyes went wide. "For me, for you." Silas crouched down and held it out. "Every boy needs a horse, even if it's just a wooden one. This one's name is Star. You take good care of him, all right?" Sammy took the horse like it was made of gold. "I promise." He threw his arms around Silas's neck. "Thank you, Mr. Silas. Thank you." Silas hugged him back, and Clara saw something shift in his face. Something raw and unguarded. When Sammy ran off to show Mrs. Patterson his treasure, Silas stood slowly. His eyes were bright. "He's a good boy." "He's everything." Clara's voice cracked. "He's the only good thing I've ever done." "That's not true." Silas held her gaze. "But I understand why you believe it." He picked up his hat from the table. "I'll come back tomorrow. Bring more supplies if you need them. And Clara." He paused at the door. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." "All right." Clara nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Silas tipped his hat and walked out into the snow. Clara stood at the window and watched him go. Sammy's delighted laughter echoing from the kitchen, and felt something she'd thought was dead begin to stir in her chest. Not just hope, something more dangerous, something that felt like the beginning of love. 3 days later, Henrietta Morrison called a town meeting. Clara stood in the back of the town hall. Sammy pressed against her side and watched the people of Coldwater Creek file in. They wouldn't look at her, wouldn't acknowledge her presence. But they came. All of them. Even Mrs. Patterson, her jaw set with grim determination. Even Silas, who pushed through the crowd to stand beside her. "You shouldn't be here," Clara whispered. "Neither should you." He took her hand. "And yet, here we both are." Henrietta stood at the front of the hall, flanked by her supporters. Her face was calm, triumphant. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I've called this meeting to address a matter of grave concern to our community. As you all know, a woman of questionable character has taken up residence in our town. A woman with an illegitimate child. A woman who has, by her own admission, been driven from multiple towns before this one." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I move that we as a community ask this woman to leave Coldwater Creek, for the protection of our families, for the preservation of our values, for the good of everyone involved." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. The vote she'd been dreading. The official stamp of rejection that would follow her to the next town and the next forever. Henrietta smiled. "All in favor." Hands began to rise. 1, 2, a dozen, more. Clara closed her eyes. "Wait!" Silas's voice rang out. Clara's eyes snapped open. Silas had stepped forward, his hand still gripping hers. Before you vote, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I want you to look at what you're doing. You're voting to cast out a woman and a child in the middle of winter. You're voting to send them into the cold with nowhere to go. You're voting to condemn them to suffering, maybe death, because you don't approve of how they came to exist. He looked around the room. Is that who you want to be? Is that the town you want to live in? Henrietta's face contorted. This is outrageous. Silas Hartley, you have no right. I have every right. Silas turned to face her. I'm a citizen of this town. I've lived here my whole life, and I'm telling you, all of you, that what you're about to do is wrong. He pulled Clara forward, and she stumbled to his side, her heart hammering. This woman's name is Clara Whitfield. She's a mother, a hard worker, a person who deserves the same mercy and grace that any of you would want if you were in her position. His voice dropped. And she's the woman I intend to marry. The hall exploded. Clara stared at him. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Silas, I know we haven't talked about this. He turned to her, his gray eyes fierce. I know it's sudden, but I've watched you for weeks, Clara. I've seen your strength, your courage, your love for that boy. And I don't want to spend another day pretending I don't feel what I feel. He took both her hands. Marry me. Not to save yourself, you don't need saving. But because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you and Sammy. Because I'm tired of being alone, and I think maybe you are too. Clara's vision blurred with tears. She thought about every man who'd ever let her down. About Edward, who'd promised her forever and given her nothing. About the years of running, of hiding, of believing she didn't deserve love. And she thought about Silas Hartley, who'd stood up for her in a church. Who'd brought supplies when the whole town turned away. Who'd carved a wooden horse for a fatherless boy and held him like he mattered. Yes, she whispered. Silas's face broke into a smile. What was that? Henrietta's voice was shrill. What did you say? Clara turned to face her. Faced the whole room. I said yes. Her voice was stronger now. I'll marry him. The crowd erupted again, but this time, Clara didn't care. Silas pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there in front of everyone, and she kissed him back. When they broke apart, Sammy was tugging at Silas's coat. Does this mean you're going to be my papa? Silas knelt down, his eyes wet. If you'll have me. Sammy threw his arms around Silas's neck. I'll have you. Clara watched them, her son, and the man who'd chosen them both, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Whole. But over Silas's shoulder she saw Henrietta Morrison's face, and the look in those cold eyes told her this war was far from over. The kiss had barely ended when Henrietta Morrison's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. This changes nothing. Clara pulled back from Silas, her heart still pounding, her lips still warm from his. The crowd had gone quiet again, all eyes fixed on the woman at the front of the hall. Henrietta's face was pale with fury, but her voice was controlled. Dangerous. A marriage proposal doesn't erase the past, Mr. Hartley. It doesn't change what this woman is. If anything, it proves my point. She turned to address the crowd. She's already seduced one of our most respected ranchers. How long before she sets her sights on your husbands, your sons? That's enough. Silas stepped forward, his body positioning itself between Clara and the crowd. You've made your accusations. Now let someone else speak. Who would speak for her? Henrietta's laugh was sharp. Who in this room would risk their reputation, their business, their standing in this community to defend a fallen woman? Silence. Clara felt her brief moment of hope begin to crumble. Of course no one would speak. No one ever did. Silas was one man against a whole town, and even his courage couldn't, I would. The voice came from the middle of the room. Clara turned to see a large man with scarred hands pushing through the crowd. Thomas Brennan, the blacksmith. I'd speak for her, Thomas said, his deep voice carrying. My wife died bringing our youngest into the world. Left me with 3 children and no idea how to raise them. Mrs. Morrison here suggested I send them to an orphanage. Said a man alone couldn't possibly manage. His jaw tightened. But I managed, because that's what you do when you love someone. You figure it out. He looked at Clara. This woman's been figuring it out for 4 years alone with everyone telling her she's worthless. That takes more strength than most people in this room will ever have. Another voice spoke up. A woman this time. Sarah Jane Thomas's younger sister, standing near the back with her arms crossed. My husband died in the mines 2 years ago. Left me with nothing but debt and shame. You know what Mrs. Morrison told me? Sarah's voice shook with old anger. She said I should have married better, that I'd made my bed and now I had to lie in it. She stepped forward. But I didn't lie in it. I got up. I found work. I survived, just like Clara's surviving. Her eyes found Henrietta. You don't get to decide who deserves mercy and who doesn't. That's not your right. More voices now. A young couple near the door. An older man who raised sheep on the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson, her weathered face set with determination. I've known this girl for weeks, Mrs. Patterson said. She works harder than anyone I've ever employed. She loves that boy more than her own life, and she hasn't done a single thing to harm anyone in this town. She fixed Henrietta with a cold stare. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like smoke. Henrietta's face had gone from pale to mottled red. Her supporters shifted uncomfortably behind her. The vote she'd been so confident of was slipping away. This is absurd, she hissed. You're all being manipulated. This woman is going to be my wife. Silas's voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the hall. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. Personally. The threat wasn't subtle. Silas Hartley wasn't a violent man, but he was big and he was strong, and the look in his eyes said he would protect what was his. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. Not from fear this time. From something she barely recognized. Belonging. The mayor, a nervous balding man who'd been trying to stay invisible, finally stepped forward. I think perhaps we should table this discussion. Emotions are running high. A vote taken now might not reflect the true will of the community. Coward, Henrietta spat. Prudent, the mayor corrected. This meeting is adjourned. The crowd began to disperse, breaking into clusters of urgent conversation. Some people shot Clara sympathetic looks. Others glared with undisguised hostility. Most just seemed eager to escape. Silas took Clara's hand. Come on. Let's get you and Sammy home. Home. The word made her chest ache. But as they walked toward the door, Henrietta's voice followed them. This isn't over, Mr. Hartley. You've made your choice. Now you'll live with the consequences. Silas didn't turn around. I plan to. They walked out into the cold, and Clara realized she was shaking. Not from fear, from the weight of everything that had just happened. Silas had proposed, in front of everyone, had declared his intentions without hesitation, without shame, and she'd said yes. What had she done? They reached the boarding house in silence, Sammy chattering happily between them about Star the wooden horse and whether real horses liked snow. Clara barely heard him. Her mind was spinning too fast. Inside, Mrs. Patterson was already stoking the fire. I'll put the boy to bed, she said, reading Clara's face. You two need to talk. She took Sammy's hand and led him upstairs, and suddenly, Clara was alone with Silas in the warm kitchen, the fire crackling, the weight of the evening pressing down on both of them. You didn't have to do that, Clara said finally. I know. You proposed to me in front of the whole town, without even asking me first, without knowing if I know. Silas removed his hat, turning it in his hands. It wasn't planned. I walked in there ready to defend you, and then Henrietta started talking about voting you out, and I just... He shook his head. I couldn't let them do it. Couldn't watch them throw you and Sammy into the snow like you were garbage. So you proposed out of pity. No. His voice was sharp. Not pity. Never pity. He set the hat down and crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. I proposed because I love you, Clara. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But I've felt more alive in the past 3 weeks than I have in 5 years of living alone on that ranch. You and Sammy, you make me remember what it's like to want something, to hope for something. His hand found her cheek rough and gentle at the same time. If you don't want to marry me, say so. I'll understand. I'll still help you. Still protect you. Still bring supplies until you're back on your feet. But if there's any chance at all that you feel even a fraction of what I feel? Clara's throat was too tight to speak. She thought about Edward, about the lies he'd told her, the promises he'd broken, about the 4 years she'd spent believing she didn't deserve love, didn't deserve happiness, didn't deserve anything but survival. And then she thought about Silas, about the wooden horse he'd carved for Sammy, about the supplies he'd brought when the whole town turned away, about the way he looked at her like she was worth something. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. I've been hurt before, badly, and I don't know if I can—" "I know." Silas's thumb traced her cheekbone. "I'm not asking you to trust me completely. Not yet. I'm just asking you to try, one day at a time, one moment at a time. Can you do that?" Clara closed her eyes. She'd spent so long running, so long hiding, so long protecting herself from a world that wanted to crush her. Maybe it was time to stop. "Yes," she breathed. "I can try." Silas smiled that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face and pulled her into his arms. Clara let herself be held. Let herself lean against his solid warmth. Let herself believe just for a moment that maybe everything would be all right. But somewhere in the back of her mind, Henrietta's voice echoed, "This isn't over." And Clara knew she was right. The next morning, the first stone came through the window. Clara was making breakfast when she heard the crash. Glass shattered across the kitchen floor. Sammy screamed, "Mama!" Clara grabbed him, pulling him away from the broken window, her heart hammering. Cold air rushed in carrying snowflakes and something else. A rock, with a piece of paper tied around it. Clara's hand shook as she untied the string and unfolded the note. 3 words written in crude letters: "Leave or die." Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "What in God's name? Someone threw this." Clara held up the note. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Hollow. Mrs. Patterson read it, and her expression hardened. Cowards, hiding behind rocks and threats instead of showing their faces. "I should go," Clara's voice cracked. "I'm putting you in danger. I'm putting everyone in danger. If I just leave, you'll leave nothing but satisfaction for whoever did this." Mrs. Patterson grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me, girl. I've lived in this town for 60 years. I've seen it at its best and its worst. And I know that giving in to bullies only makes them bolder. But Sammy, we'll be safe. We'll board up the window. We'll be careful. And we'll find out who did this." "How?" "Because they're not as clever as they think they are." Mrs. Patterson's eyes glittered. "And because they've just made a powerful enemy." She stalked out of the kitchen, muttering about cowards and consequences. Clara looked down at Sammy, who was pressed against her leg, his small face pale with fear. "Are bad people trying to hurt us, Mama?" "Some people are scared of things they don't understand, sweet boy. And sometimes scared people do bad things." "But Mr. Silas isn't scared." "No." Clara stroked his hair. "Mr. Silas isn't scared." "Good." Sammy's jaw set with determination that looked almost comical on his 4-year-old face. "I'm not scared either. Star isn't scared. We're going to be brave like Mr. Silas." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, baby. We're going to be brave." Silas arrived within the hour, his face dark with fury. "I heard what happened. Thomas sent word." He examined the broken window, the rock, the note. His jaw tightened with each passing second. This is Henrietta's doing. Has to be. We can't prove that, Clara said. Don't need to prove it. Just need to know it. He turned to her. You're not staying here anymore. Pack your things. You and Sammy are coming to the ranch. Silas. It's not safe here, Clara. Whoever did this might try again. At least at the ranch I can protect you. And what happens when they come for you there, when they burn your barn or poison your horses? Then I'll deal with it. His voice was hard. But I won't stand by and watch them terrorize you while I'm 5 miles away, helpless to do anything. Clara hesitated. Moving to Silas's ranch felt like surrender somehow, like admitting she couldn't survive on her own. But she looked at Sammy, still clutching his wooden horse, still trying to be brave, and something shifted in her chest. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about him. All right, she said quietly. We'll come. The ride to Silas's ranch took just over an hour. Clara sat beside him on the wagon seat, Sammy between them, their few belongings packed in the back. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky was still gray heavy with the promise of more. The ranch appeared around a bend in the road. A sturdy house with fresh paint on the shutters. A barn that had seen better days but stood solid against the wind. Corrals where horses stamped and snorted in the cold. It's not fancy. Silas said, a note of self-consciousness in his voice. But it's warm and safe, and there's plenty of room. It's beautiful, Clara said, and meant it. Sammy was already scrambling down from the wagon, his eyes wide with wonder. Horses, real horses. Can I touch them? Can I ride them? Can I? Easy, son. Silas caught him before he could run toward the corral. Horses spook easy. You have to approach them slow and gentle. I'll teach you how. Promise? Promise. They unloaded the wagon, and Silas showed them around. The house was simple, but well kept. Clara could see where he'd made improvements. New shelves, repaired floorboards, fresh whitewash on the walls. He'd been preparing for this, she realized. Preparing for them. This'll be your room, he said, opening a door at the end of the hall. I put up some shelves for the boys' things. There's a quilt my mother made on the bed. I hope that's all right. Clara stepped inside. The room was small but cozy, with a window overlooking the corrals and a fireplace already laid with wood. On the bed, a colorful quilt had been spread with obvious care. You did all this? She said softly. For us. I had hope. Silas's voice was rough. Maybe more hope than sense. But I wanted you to have a place that felt like home, if you decided to stay. Clara turned to face him. I'm staying, Silas. I said yes and I meant it. I know you did. But saying yes in a town hall full of chaos is different from saying yes in the quiet. He met her eyes. I want you to be sure. I don't want you to feel trapped. I don't feel trapped. Clara stepped closer to him. I feel found. For the first time in 4 years, I feel like someone actually sees me. Not my shame, not my mistakes, just me. Silas's expression softened. I do see you, Clara. I see everything, and I love everything I see. He kissed her then, gentle and slow, and Clara let herself sink into it. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place to stop running. The peace lasted 3 days. Clara spent the time learning the rhythms of the ranch. She cooked meals with supplies from the well-stocked pantry. She mended clothes while Silas worked with the horses. She watched Sammy learn to approach the animals with patience, his fear transforming into wonder under Silas's careful guidance. At night, she and Silas sat by the fire and talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about his parents, her childhood, the dreams they'd had before life got hard. It felt natural in a way Clara hadn't expected, like they'd known each other much longer than a few weeks. On the third night, Silas asked the question she'd been dreading. Will you tell me about Sammy's father? Clara stiffened. They were sitting on the porch wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the stars emerge one by one. "You don't have to," Silas added quickly. "I said I wouldn't ask until you were ready. If you're not ready—" "No." Clara took a breath. "You deserve to know. You've given us everything. The least I can give you is the truth." She stared at the sky, gathering her thoughts. "His name was Edward Prescott, the third." A bitter laugh escaped her. "That should have been my first warning. Men with numbers after their names don't marry shop girls." She told him everything: how they'd met, how he'd courted her with pretty words and false promises, how she'd believed him when he said he loved her, that he'd marry her as soon as he settled his affairs, that she was different from the other girls. "I was so young," she said softly. "So stupid. I thought I'd found something real, something that would last." "What happened?" "I got pregnant." Clara's voice flattened. "The moment I told him, everything changed. He got cold, distant, said he needed time to think." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. 3 days later, he was gone. Left a note saying his family would never accept me. That our arrangement had been a mistake. That he was going abroad and I shouldn't try to contact him. Silas was silent for a long moment. "Did you try to contact him once?" "I went to his family's house. They wouldn't let me pass the gate. His mother sent a servant to tell me that if I ever showed my face again, they'd have me arrested for harassment." Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. She'd cried enough over Edward Prescott. "I was 7 months pregnant, alone, unemployed. The shop had let me go as soon as I started showing. I had nowhere to go, no one to help me." "How did you survive?" "Charity, the kindness of strangers who expected nothing in return." Clara smiled grimly. "There weren't many of them. But there were some. A woman at a church gave me a place to stay until the baby came. A midwife delivered Sammy for free because she said every child deserved a chance." She looked at Silas. "After Sammy was born, I tried to make a life for us. But word travels fast. Every town I went to, eventually someone would find out. About the baby, about the missing husband, and the doors would start closing one by one. 3 towns. 3 towns in 4 years. Each time I'd stay as long as I could, work as hard as I could, try to become invisible enough that people would leave us alone. And each time someone like Henrietta would decide I wasn't worthy of existing in their community." She shook her head. "I thought Coldwater Creek would be different. I thought maybe I could disappear here, make a fresh start. I should have known better." Silas reached over and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. "I'm glad you came here," he said quietly. "I'm glad you didn't disappear. Even with all the trouble I've brought. The trouble isn't yours, it's theirs." His voice hardened. "And I'll be damned if I let them win." Clara leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I've never told anyone the whole story," she admitted. "Not even Mrs. Patterson. I was always too ashamed." "You've got nothing to be ashamed of, Clara. You trusted someone, and he betrayed you. That's not your sin. It's his. Tell that to the rest of the world." "I don't care about the rest of the world." Silas turned to face her, his gray eyes fierce in the starlight. "I care about you, about Sammy, about the life we're going to build together." He cupped her face in his rough hands. "I love you, Clara Whitfield, all of you. Your past, your present, your future. And I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that you're worthy of that love." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Silas." He kissed her, soft at first, then deeper, full of promise and longing, and something that felt like forever. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was trembling, not from cold. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I could. After Edward, I thought that part of me was dead. But you—" She shook her head. "You make me believe again." Silas smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that lit up his whole face. Then we'll believe together." They sat on the porch until the cold drove them inside, hands intertwined, watching the stars wheel overhead. For the first time in years, Clara felt something she'd forgotten existed: peace. The wedding was planned for the following Saturday. Silas wanted to do it quickly before Henrietta could organize more opposition. Mrs. Patterson agreed to help with the preparations. Sarah Jane offered to bake a cake. Even Thomas Brennan volunteered his forge for the wedding band. "Simple gold," Silas told him. "Nothing fancy. Just something that'll last." Clara spent the week in a daze of activity and emotion. She altered one of Mrs. Patterson's old dresses for the ceremony. She taught Sammy what it meant to have a papa. She tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. On Friday night, she sat by the fire with Silas, both of them nervous and excited and scared. "Tomorrow," Clara said softly, "tomorrow I'll be your wife. You're already my wife in every way that matters." Silas took her hand. "Tomorrow just makes it official." "Official matters. Official means they can't take it away." "Nobody's taking anything away." His grip tightened. "Not ever again." Clara leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent of horses and leather and wood smoke. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "So am I." "You don't seem scared." "I've had practice hiding it." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "But I know one thing for certain. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, we face it together. You and me and Sammy. A family." Clara closed her eyes. A family. She'd stopped believing in that word years ago. Had stopped thinking it applied to her. But sitting here in the warmth of Silas's arms in the house he'd prepared for them with her son, sleeping peacefully in the next room, maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe family was still possible. She fell asleep that night with hope burning in her chest, brighter than it had been in 4 long years. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. Clara woke early, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and terror. Today she would become Clara Hartley. Today her son would have a father. Today everything would change. She dressed carefully in the altered blue dress, braided her hair with trembling fingers, and looked at herself in the small mirror Silas had hung for her. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she looked different, but because she looked happy, hopeful, alive. "Mama!" Sammy appeared in the doorway, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is today the day?" "Today's the day, sweet boy. The day Mr. Silas becomes my papa." "That's right." Sammy's face split into a grin. "Good. I've been practicing calling him Papa. I think he likes it." Clara laughed, pulling him into a hug. "I think he does too." They ate breakfast together, all 3 of them like a real family, and then Silas hitched up the wagon and they set out for town. The church was small, just big enough for the handful of people who'd agreed to come. Mrs. Patterson, Thomas Brennan and his children, Sarah Jane, Pastor Whitmore, who'd agreed to perform the ceremony despite the controversy. As Clara walked up the aisle with Sammy's small hand in hers, she saw Silas waiting at the altar. He was wearing a clean shirt and his best coat, his dark hair combed back, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. This was real. This was happening. She reached the altar, and Silas took her hand. "You look beautiful," he murmured. "You look scared." Terrified. His mouth twitched. But happy. Pastor Whitmore cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Clara heard the words distantly, "Love, honor, cherish, until death do us part." But mostly, she heard the pounding of her own heart. Felt the warmth of Silas's hands around hers. Saw the future stretching out before them, uncertain and frightening, and full of possibility. "Do you, Silas James Hartley, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Clara May Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara looked at Silas, at his steady gray eyes, at the hope and love and determination written across his weathered face. "I do." Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Silas kissed her, and the small congregation burst into applause. Clara clung to him, laughing and crying at the same time, feeling lighter than she had in years. "We did it," she whispered against his lips. "We did it." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "You're mine now, Clara Hartley. And you're mine. Forever." The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. Sarah Jane had indeed baked a cake 3 layers decorated with sugar flowers. Mrs. Patterson had brought her best cider. Even the children were laughing and playing Sammy, running among them like he'd always belonged. For a few perfect hours, Clara forgot about Henrietta Morrison, forgot about the threats and the broken window and the note that said, "Leave or die." She was a wife, a mother, a member of a community that had chosen to accept her. She was happy. The happiness lasted until the sun began to set. They were loading the wagon to head back to the ranch when Thomas Brennan came running from the direction of town, his face pale with alarm. "Silas, Clara, there's been trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Silas's voice sharpened. "The ranch." Thomas was breathing hard. "Someone set fire to your barn." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Silas was already moving, climbing onto the wagon, grabbing the reins. Clara barely had time to pull Sammy up beside her before he cracked the whip and the horses lurched forward. The ride back seemed to take forever. Clara clutched Sammy against her chest, praying silently, desperately, that it wasn't as bad as she feared. But when they rounded the bend and saw the ranch, her prayers turned to ash. The barn was a skeleton of flames against the darkening sky. The horses were screaming in the corrals. And standing at the edge of the property, silhouetted against the fire, was a figure Clara recognized instantly: Henrietta Morrison. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, his face twisted with fury. "What have you done?" Henrietta turned slowly. Her face was calm, triumphant. "I warned you, Mr. Hartley. I told you there would be consequences." Clara climbed down from the wagon, keeping Sammy behind her. Her whole body was trembling. "You burned his barn. You could have killed the horses. You could have... Could have what?" Henrietta's smile was cold. "Sent a message, yes. I believe I did." "This is arson." Silas's voice was barely controlled. "This is a crime. I'll have the sheriff..." "You'll have nothing." Henrietta cut him off. "The sheriff is my nephew. The mayor owes me money. The judge belongs to my husband's lodge." She spread her hands. "Who do you think this town will believe, a respected widow defending her community, or a rancher who married a whore?" The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Silas stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "If you ever call her that again..." "You'll what?" "Strike me, please do." Henrietta's eyes glittered. "It would make things so much simpler." She turned to Clara and her smile widened. "This is what happens when you don't take good advice, Miss Whitfield. Or should I say, Mrs. Hartley now. Enjoy your wedding night. It may be your last peaceful one for some time." She walked away into the darkness, leaving them standing in the flickering light of the flames. Clara stared at the burning barn, at the destruction of everything Silas had worked for, and felt something cold settle into her bones. This was her fault. All of it. She'd brought this on him. Brought destruction to the only man who'd ever loved her, ever chosen. Her ever believed she was worth fighting for. And she couldn't let it continue. "Clara." Silas's voice was gentle. "Clara, look at me." She turned to face him. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. This is all because of me. If I hadn't come here, if you hadn't..." "Stop." He took her face in his hands. "This is not your fault. This is Henrietta's fault. Her cruelty, her hatred, her choice." "But..." "No buts." His voice was fierce. "We're married now, for better or worse, and this is worse, but we'll get through it, together." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love could survive this, that their fragile new family could weather the storm. But looking at the ruins of the barn at the future going up in flames, she wasn't sure anymore. She wasn't sure of anything. The fire burned until midnight. Silas worked through the darkness hauling buckets from the well, trying to save what could be saved. Thomas Brennan arrived within the hour bringing 2 of his boys and every bucket they owned. Sarah Jane came with blankets and food. Even Mrs. Patterson made the long ride from town, her weathered face grim in the firelight. Clara watched them work Sammy asleep in her arms and felt her heart crack into pieces. These people were here because of her. They were risking Henrietta's wrath, spending their wedding night fighting flames, all because she dared to exist in this town. When the last embers finally died, Silas stood in front of the smoking ruins, his face black with soot, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Clara walked up beside him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He didn't answer, just kept staring at the ashes. "Silas, please say something." "My father built that barn." His voice was hollow. 40 years ago when he first claimed this land. He cut every timber himself, raised every beam with his own hands. He shook his head slowly. It survived blizzards, droughts, a prairie fire in 71. And now it's gone. Because one woman decided my wife wasn't worthy of mercy. Clara's throat closed. "I'll leave. Tonight. I'll take Sammy and go and she'll leave you alone." "No." Silas turned to face her. His eyes were red from smoke and exhaustion, but they burned with something fierce. "You're not running. Not this time. Not ever again." "But the barn can be rebuilt." He grabbed her shoulders. "Wood and nails, Clara. That's all it was. But you and Sammy, you're my family. And I don't rebuild family. I don't replace family. I protect it." How she owns this town. She has the sheriff, the mayor, everyone. Not everyone. Silas glanced at Thomas and Sarah Jane still helping clear debris. "Not them. Not Mrs. Patterson. Not the people who came to our wedding. A handful against an army. Then we find more." His jaw set. "Henrietta Morrison has enemies. People she's hurt over the years. People who are afraid to speak up because they think they're alone. We show them they're not alone. We build something she can't burn down." Clara stared at him, this impossible man who refused to give up even when everything was ashes around him. "You really believe we can win this?" "I believe we have to try." He pulled her against his chest. "I didn't marry you to give up at the first sign of trouble. I married you for better or worse. This is worse. So we fight." Clara buried her face in his shirt, breathing in the smell of smoke and sweat and something underneath that was just him. Just Silas. "I love you," she said against his chest. "I love you too." He kissed the top of her head. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we start rebuilding." The next weeks were brutal. Silas worked from dawn until dark, clearing debris, salvaging what materials he could, planning the new barn. Thomas came by whenever he could spare time from the forge. Other men appeared too quietly without announcement, men who'd had their own run-ins with Henrietta Morrison and were finally ready to push back. Clara threw herself into work as well. She cooked for the volunteers, mended their clothes, kept the house running while Silas focused on the barn. At night, she fell into bed exhausted, too tired even for nightmares. But the nightmares came anyway. She dreamed of fire, of Henrietta's cold smile, of Sammy's small body going still in her arms. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat, and Silas held her until the trembling stopped. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe. You're home." Home. The word still felt strange on her tongue. She'd never had a home before, not really. Just temporary shelters, places to hide until the world found her again. But lying in Silas's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, she started to believe that maybe this was different. Maybe this could last. 2 weeks after the fire, Doc Coleman came to the ranch. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw him riding up the road. Her hand stilled on the wet sheet, her whole body tensing. The last time she'd seen the doctor, He'd turned her away while her son burned with fever. Silas emerged from the half-built barn, his expression guarded. "Doc, what brings you out here?" Coleman dismounted slowly. He looked older than Clara remembered, his shoulders hunched, his eyes carrying a weight she hadn't noticed before. "I came to apologize." Clara's hands tightened on the sheet. "Apologize?" "For turning you away. When your boy was sick." Coleman wouldn't meet her eyes. "That was wrong. I knew it was wrong even then. But I was scared. Henrietta had made threats, said she'd ruin my practice if I helped you, and I was a coward." He finally looked up. "I've been a coward for a long time, Mrs. Hartley. Doing what Henrietta wanted, keeping my head down, pretending I didn't see the people she hurt. But the fire—" He shook his head. "That was too far, even for her." "What are you saying?" Silas stepped closer. "I'm saying I'm done being afraid." Coleman straightened his spine. "I'm saying if you need medical help, you come to me, anytime, day or night. And I'm saying I know things about Henrietta Morrison that she doesn't want known." Clara's breath caught. "What kind of things?" Coleman hesitated, glancing around as if the very air might be listening. "Not here, not now, but soon, when I've gathered what I need." He mounted his horse. "I just wanted you to know you're not as alone as she wants you to think." He rode away, leaving Clara and Silas staring after him. "Do you believe him?" Clara asked. "I believe he's scared, and scared men can be dangerous." Silas turned to her. "But they can also be useful. If he really has something on Henrietta, then maybe this isn't hopeless after all." "It was never hopeless." Silas took her hand. "I told you. We fight." The third week brought another visitor, and this one Clara hadn't expected at all. She was alone in the house. Silas had gone to town for supplies when someone knocked on the door. Clara opened it carefully, half expecting to find another threat waiting. Instead, she found a young woman, maybe 20 years old, with auburn hair and frightened eyes and a swollen belly that couldn't be more than a few months along. "Please," the girl whispered. "I need help." Clara's heart clenched. She knew that look. Had worn it herself once. "Come in." The girl's name was Mary. Mary Sullivan. She'd worked at the hotel in town until 3 weeks ago, when her condition became impossible to hide. "They threw me out." Mary said, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea Clara had made her. "No warning, no final pay, just out. And nobody will hire me now. Nobody will even talk to me." "The father," Mary laughed bitterly. "A drummer who passed through in the fall, told me he loved me, told me he'd come back for me. I was stupid enough to believe him." Clara felt the old familiar anger rise in her chest. How many women had heard those same words? How many had been destroyed by that same lie? "You're not stupid," Clara said firmly. "You were trusting. There's a difference." Mary looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Everyone says I brought this on myself, that I deserve what's happening." "They're wrong." Clara set down her own cup and took Mary's hands. "Listen to me. You made a choice to trust someone. That's not a crime. What he did, lying to you, abandoning you, that's the crime. You don't deserve punishment for someone else's sin." "But my baby is innocent. Completely innocent." Clara squeezed Mary's hands. "And so are you." Mary broke down then, sobbing against Clara's shoulder. Clara held her, remembering her own darkest moments, the times when she'd felt so alone she'd wanted to disappear entirely. But she hadn't disappeared. She'd survived. And now maybe she could help someone else survive too. When Silas came home that evening, Clara was waiting with a proposition. "Absolutely not," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Silas, she has nowhere to go. She's pregnant and alone, and—" "I know." He ran a hand through his hair. "I know, Clara, but we're barely surviving ourselves. The barn's not finished. We've got enemies in town who'd love nothing more than to see us fail. Taking in another mouth to feed another target for Henrietta is exactly what she'd hate most. Clara stepped closer. Don't you see? This is how we fight back. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone like us. Everyone Henrietta has hurt, has driven out, has made to feel worthless. She took his face in her hands. You told me I wasn't alone. You showed me what that meant. Let me show someone else. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, and something in his expression softened. Where would she sleep? Clara smiled. We'll figure it out. Mary moved in the next day. She was a hard worker despite her condition. Within a week, she'd taken over much of the cooking, freeing Clara to help more with the barn construction. Sammy adored her, following her around the house, asking endless questions about the baby in her belly. Is it a boy or a girl? I don't know yet, sweetheart. I hope it's a boy. Then I can teach him things, like how to take care of horses. Mary laughed, a real laugh, maybe the first Clara had heard from her. I'd like that. Word spread quickly that the Hartley Ranch had become a haven for fallen women. Some people were disgusted. Others were curious. A few were grateful. Over the following weeks, 2 more women found their way to Clara's door. Elizabeth, a widow, whose husband had died leaving debts she couldn't pay, who'd been evicted from her home by creditors Henrietta controlled. And Agnes, an older woman who'd worked as a seamstress until her eyesight began to fail. And Henrietta had convinced her customers to take their business elsewhere. The ranch was crowded now, but it was alive in a way it hadn't been before. There was laughter in the kitchen, conversation around the dinner table, children playing in the yard. Clara watched it all and felt something grow in her chest that she barely recognized. Pride. She was proud of what they were building. Henrietta predictably was not pleased. The confrontation came on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after Mary's arrival. Clara was in the yard with Sammy when she saw the carriage approaching, black and gleaming, pulled by matched horses that must have cost more than the whole Hartley Ranch. Henrietta Morrison stepped down like a queen descending from her throne. Mrs. Hartley. Her voice was ice. We need to talk. Clara straightened her spine. Sammy, go inside and find Mary. But Mama. Now please. Sammy ran, and Clara faced Henrietta alone. What do you want? I want to make you an offer. Henrietta's smile was poisonous. A generous offer, all things considered. I'm listening. Leave Coldwater Creek. Take your husband, your son, your collection of strays. I'll pay your moving expenses. I'll even give you a sum to help you start over somewhere else. Her eyes glittered. $500. More money than you've seen in your life. Clara's breath caught. $500. It was a fortune. Enough to buy land, build a house, start fresh somewhere where nobody knew their names. And if I refuse? Henrietta's expression hardened. Then things will get worse. Much worse. The barn fire was a warning. The next fire might not be so easily contained. You're threatening to burn down our house with people inside. I'm simply observing that accidents happen, especially to people who refuse to know their place. Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot, fierce, demanding release. But she held it back, forced herself to think instead of react. Why do you hate me so much? She asked quietly. What did I ever do to you? Something flickered across Henrietta's face, just for a moment. So fast, Clara almost missed it. You exist, Henrietta said flatly. You exist and people see you and they start to think that maybe the rules don't matter. Maybe anyone can just do whatever they want and face no consequences. Maybe shame is optional. And that scares you. It disgusts me. Henrietta's voice rose. I've spent my entire life building something in this town. Order, standards, respectability. And you're tearing it down just by being here. No. Clara took a step closer. You're scared. Scared that if people stop believing shame is permanent, they might look at you differently. Might start asking questions about your own past. The color drained from Henrietta's face. "What did you say?" "Doc Coleman came to see us." Clara watched Henrietta's expression carefully. "He said he knows things about you, things you don't want known." "That old drunk doesn't know anything." "Then why do you look so frightened?" Henrietta's composure cracked. For one moment, Clara saw something beneath the ice: fear, yes, but also pain. Old pain, deep pain. Then the mask slammed back into place. "You'll regret this," Henrietta hissed. "You'll regret every word." She swept back to her carriage and was gone. Clara stood in the yard, her heart pounding, and wondered what she'd just unleashed. That night, she told Silas everything. He listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "She's going to escalate," he said finally. "She's cornered, desperate. That makes her dangerous." "I know. We need to find out what Coleman knows. Whatever secret he's holding, it might be our only protection. And if he's wrong, if there's nothing—" Silas met her eyes. "Then we fight anyway, because I'll be damned if I let that woman drive us out of our home." Clara reached for his hand. Together. Together. But in the darkness that night, Clara lay awake and wondered if together would be enough. Henrietta Morrison had power-money influence. She had the sheriff and the mayor and half the town afraid to cross her. What did Clara have? A husband who loved her. A son who trusted her. A handful of broken women who'd found refuge under her roof. It wasn't much. But maybe it was enough to start. The secret came out 3 days later. Doc Coleman arrived at the ranch after dark, his face pale, his hands trembling. He'd been drinking. Clara could smell it on his breath, but his eyes were clear enough, determined. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I've kept quiet for 30 years. They sat around the kitchen table, Clara, Silas, Mary Elizabeth, Agnes, all of them listening as the doctor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Henrietta Morrison wasn't always Henrietta Morrison. Before she married Howard Morrison, she was Hattie Jenkins, the daughter of a drunk and a washerwoman, the poorest family in 3 counties. Clara's eyes widened. She came from nothing. Less than nothing. Coleman's mouth twisted. But Hattie was smart, beautiful, ambitious. She set her sights on Howard Morrison when she was 16 years old, and she didn't stop until she had him. "That's not a secret," Silas said. "That's determination. The secret is what happened before." Coleman's voice dropped even lower. "When Hattie was 15, she got pregnant, by the son of the family she worked for. He was 18, about to leave for college. His parents paid Hattie's mother to send the girl away." Clara's blood went cold. She had a child. A girl, born in a charity hospital in Denver, given up for adoption the same day. Coleman shook his head. Hattie came back 6 months later, thinner, harder, with a story about visiting relatives in California. Nobody questioned it. Nobody knew. "How do you know?" "Because I was the one who delivered the baby." Coleman's eyes were haunted. "I was young then, just starting out. They paid me to keep quiet, and God help me I did. For 30 years I kept Henrietta Morrison's secret." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Clara thought about everything Henrietta had said to her. About shame, about standards, about the rules that had to be followed. And she understood. "She's terrified," Clara breathed. "That's why she hates women like me so much. Because we remind her of who she was, of what she did, of what she gave up." Coleman nodded slowly. "That child would be nearly 40 now. Somewhere out there, living a life Henrietta knows nothing about. Does anyone else know this? No one living. The boy's family is dead. Hattie's mother is dead. The only witnesses left are me and Henrietta herself." Silas leaned forward. "Can you prove it? If it came to a public accusation, is there evidence?" Coleman reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. "I kept the birth record. I don't know why. Insurance, maybe. Or guilt. He pushed it across the table. This is Henrietta Morrison's original sin, the one she spent her whole life trying to bury. Clara stared at the paper, at the faded ink that spelled out Hattie Jenkins, female infant father unknown. She had Henrietta's secret in her hands. The question was, what would she do with it? Clara held the birth record in her hands for a long time. The paper was fragile edges, crumbling ink fading, but the words were still clear enough. Hattie Jenkins, female infant, father unknown. The same shame Henrietta had spent 30 years punishing in others, she'd carried it herself all along. "What do we do with this?" Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "We could destroy her." Elizabeth's eyes were hard. "Show everyone what she really is. Let the whole town see that their precious moral guardian is nothing but a hypocrite." "It would ruin her," Agnes agreed. "Everything she's built, everything she's done, gone in an instant." Clara looked at Silas. His face was unreadable. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think it's not my decision." He met her eyes. "She's hurt you more than anyone. She's tried to drive you out, burn us out, destroy everything we have. If anyone has the right to use this against her, it's you." Clara stared at the paper again. Her hands were trembling. She thought about the church where Henrietta had called her shameful in front of everyone, about the stores that had closed their doors, about the rock through the window, about the barn burning while they watched helplessly. She had every right to want revenge. But she also thought about something else. About a 15-year-old girl, scared and alone, giving up a baby she'd probably wanted to keep. About the years of hiding, of building walls, of becoming so hard that softness felt like weakness. Henrietta Morrison wasn't a monster. She was a woman who'd made a mistake and spent her whole life punishing herself and everyone else for it. "I need time," Clara said quietly. "I need to think." Doc Coleman nodded. "The paper's yours now. Do what you want with it. But be careful. Henrietta isn't going to go quietly whatever you decide." He left, and Clara sat at the table long after the others had gone to bed, the birth record spread before her, wrestling with a choice that felt too heavy for any one person to carry. The next morning, Clara made her decision. "I'm going to talk to her," she told Silas over breakfast. He set down his coffee cup slowly. "Talk to her. Alone. Just the two of us." "Clara, that's insane. She threatened to burn down our house. She's dangerous." "I know." Clara took a breath. "But I don't think she started out dangerous. I think she started out scared. And scared people do terrible things because they don't know any other way." "You want to show her mercy after everything she's done." "I want to understand her." Clara met his eyes. "And maybe help her understand me. If there's any chance at all that this can end without more destruction, I have to try." Silas was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked, and she could see him fighting against every protective instinct in his body. "I'm coming with you," he said finally. "No, this has to be between her and me, woman to woman." She took his hand. "Trust me, please." "I trust you." His voice was rough. "It's her I don't trust." "Then trust that I can handle her, that I'm stronger than you think." Silas pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I know how strong you are. That's not what scares me." "What does?" "Losing you, after finally finding you." He held her tighter. "If anything happens." "It won't." Clara pulled back to look at him. "I'll come home, I promise." She rode into town alone, the birth record tucked inside her coat, her heart pounding with every step her borrowed horse took. The Morrison house was the largest in Coldwater Creek, a 2-story Victorian with wraparound porches and lace curtains in every window. Clara had walked past it dozens of times, always with her head down, always hurrying. Today, she walked up the front steps and knocked on the door. A servant answered, her eyes widening with surprise. "Mrs. Hartley? Mrs. Morrison isn't receiving visitors." "She'll receive me." Clara's voice was steady. "Tell her I have something she wants to see." The servant hesitated, then disappeared inside. Clara waited, her hands clasped to hide their shaking. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the door opened again. "Mrs. Morrison will see you in the parlor." Clara followed the servant through a hallway lined with expensive paintings and gilt-framed mirrors. Everything gleamed, everything was perfect, and everything felt cold. Henrietta was waiting in a chair by the fireplace, her posture rigid, her face a mask of controlled fury. "You have nerve coming here." "I have something you need to see." Clara reached into her coat and pulled out the birth record. "And something you need to hear." Henrietta's eyes fixed on the paper. Her face went white. "Where did you get that?" "Doc Coleman." Clara didn't move closer, just held the paper up so Henrietta could see it clearly. "He kept it all these years. Insurance," he said. "That old drunk." Henrietta's voice shook. "I should have had him run out of town years ago." "But you didn't. Because somewhere inside, you knew he was keeping your secret safe." Clara lowered the paper. "The same secret you've been running from your whole life." "You don't know anything about my life." "I know you were 15. I know you were scared. I know you gave up a daughter because you had no other choice." Clara's voice softened. "I know exactly how that feels, Henrietta. Better than anyone." Something cracked in Henrietta's expression. Just for a moment. A flicker of the girl she'd been before the walls went up. "You think this changes anything?" Her voice was harsh. "You think showing me this paper will make me suddenly embrace you as a sister in suffering? We're nothing alike." "We're exactly alike." Clara took a step closer. "We both trusted men who lied to us. We both paid the price for their lies. The only difference is I kept my child. You couldn't." "I didn't want to keep her." Henrietta's voice cracked. "I wanted to be free of it. Free of the shame, the judgment, the way everyone looked at me like I was dirt. And then you became the one doing the judging. Because someone has to." Henrietta stood abruptly, her composure shattering. "Someone has to maintain standards. If we just accept everyone, forgive everything, pretend that choices don't have consequences, then what? People might be happy, they might not suffer the way you suffered. They need to suffer." Henrietta's eyes blazed. "I suffered. I gave up everything. My daughter, my past, my true self. I became someone new, someone respectable, someone worthy. And I will not watch everything I built crumble because some girl with a bastard child decides the rules don't apply to her." The word hit Clara like a slap. But she didn't flinch. "Sammy isn't a bastard. He's a child. An innocent child who didn't choose his circumstances any more than your daughter chose hers." Henrietta flinched. "What happened to her?" Clara asked quietly. "Your daughter. Do you know?" "No." Henrietta's voice was barely audible. "I never knew. I wasn't allowed to know." "Don't you wonder?" "Every day." Tears were streaming down Henrietta's face, now cutting tracks through her perfect powder. "Every single day for 30 years I've wondered if she's alive, if she's happy, if she ever thinks about the mother who gave her away." Clara felt her own eyes burning. "Then how can you do this to other women? How can you inflict the same pain on them that was inflicted on you?" "Because it's the only way I know how to survive." Henrietta sank back into her chair, suddenly looking older than her years. "If I let go of the anger, if I stop fighting, then I have to face what I did. Who I really am. And I can't. I can't." Clara looked at this woman who had been her enemy, her tormentor, the source of all her suffering in Coldwater Creek. And she saw something she hadn't expected. Herself. 20 years from now if she'd taken a different path. She crossed the room and knelt in front of Henrietta's chair. "You don't have to be this person anymore." Henrietta looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "What?" "The anger, the hatred, the need to control everyone and everything. You don't have to carry it anymore." Clara reached out and took Henrietta's cold hands in her own. "You can let it go." "If I let it go, I have nothing left." "That's not true." Clara squeezed her hands. "You have a chance, right now, right here, to be something different, to stop hurting people and start helping them, to find your daughter maybe, to make peace with who you were and who you can become." Henrietta shook her head. "It's too late. I've done too much. The whole town knows what I am." "The whole town knows what you've shown them. But people change. I've seen it. Thomas Brennan, Sarah Jane Doc Coleman, they all chose to be different than they were. You can too. And if I can't, if I'm too broken, too far gone." Clara thought about her own journey, about the years of shame and hiding and believing she didn't deserve love, about Silas who'd seen past all of it to something worth fighting for. Then you try anyway, and you keep trying, because the alternative is spending the rest of your life alone, surrounded by people who fear you but don't love you. And trust me, Henrietta, that's not living. That's just a slower kind of death. Henrietta was silent for a long time. Her hands trembled in Clara's grip. "What do you want from me?" she whispered finally. "I want you to stop. Stop the attacks, the threats, the intimidation. Let us live in peace. Let Mary and Elizabeth and Agnes have a chance at a real life." "And the paper, the birth record?" Clara released Henrietta's hands and stood. She walked to the fireplace and held the paper over the flames. Henrietta gasped. "What are you doing?" "I'm making a choice." Clara looked at her. "The choice you never had. The choice to show mercy instead of judgment." She dropped the paper into the fire. They both watched it burn. The edges curled, the ink blackened. And then it was gone, ash and memory, and nothing more. "Why?" Henrietta's voice cracked. "You could have destroyed me. You could have taken everything." "I know." Clara turned to face her. "But destroying you wouldn't give me back what I lost. It wouldn't heal Sammy's scars or rebuild the barn or erase the nights I lay awake terrified of what you'd do next." She moved toward the door. "The only thing that heals is choosing differently. Choosing love over hate, mercy over revenge. I learned that from a man who refused to give up on me when everyone else had." She paused at the threshold. "You could learn it too, if you wanted. And if I don't, if I keep fighting." Clara looked back at her. "Then I'll keep fighting too. But I'm hoping it won't come to that. I'm hoping somewhere inside you there's still a 15-year-old girl who remembers what it felt like to be judged. And I'm hoping she's tired of becoming the thing she feared most." She walked out without another word. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than the ride into town. Clara's hands shook on the reins. Her whole body trembled with the release of tension she'd been holding for hours. She'd done it. She'd faced Henrietta Morrison alone, had looked into the eyes of her enemy and seen a broken woman instead of a monster. And she'd chosen mercy. Now she had to wait and see if mercy would be enough. Silas was waiting on the porch when she rode up. His face was tight with worry, but it relaxed when he saw her. "You're all right." "I'm all right." She dismounted and walked into his arms. Let him hold her while she finally allowed herself to shake. "What happened?" Clara told him everything. About the conversation, about what she'd learned, about the birth record burning in the fireplace. When she finished, Silas was quiet for a long moment. "You burned it. Our only leverage against her." "It wasn't leverage, it was a weapon, and I didn't want to be the kind of person who used it. Even if it means she comes after us again. Even then." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Are you angry?" Silas studied her face. Then he shook his head slowly. I married you because you're the strongest person I've ever met. The kindest. The most determined to see good in people, even when they don't deserve it. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm not angry. I'm proud. Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. I don't know if it will work. She might not change. She might. Then we deal with whatever comes. Silas kissed her forehead. Together. Always together. They stood on the porch holding each other while the sun set over the half-rebuilt barn, over the house full of women who'd found refuge over the life they were building out of ashes and hope. 3 days passed without word from Henrietta, then a week. Clara waited tense and watchful, expecting retaliation at any moment, but nothing came. No threats, no fires, no rocks through windows. The town noticed the change before Clara did. Something's different, Thomas Brennan said when he came by to help with the barn. People are talking, but it's not the same talk. They're confused. About what? About you. About Henrietta. Word got out that you went to see her, and then nothing happened. No explosion, no public confrontation. He shook his head. In this town, that's news. Sarah Jane came by with similar observations. Mrs. Morrison hasn't been to church in 2 weeks. Her usual group of followers is lost without her, and I heard the general store started serving you again. It was true. When Clara went to town for supplies, George the shopkeeper met her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived in Coldwater Creek. Mrs. Hartley. His voice was gruff. What can I get you? No apology, no explanation. But the door was open, and that was something. Slowly, carefully, life began to change. More people acknowledged Clara on the street. A few even spoke to her. Patterson reported that the boarding house was busier than it had been in months. People passing through, curious about the town that had become the center of so much drama. You're famous, she told Clara with a dry smile. Or infamous. Depends on who you ask. The barn was finished in mid-December, just before the worst of the winter weather hit. Thomas and his boys raised the final beam, while Clara Mary and the other women watched from the yard. Silas stood beside Clara, his arm around her shoulders. It's better than the old one, he said quietly. Stronger. Built to last. Clara leaned into him. Like us. Like us. That night, they had a celebration. Everyone who'd helped with the barn came, Thomas, Sarah Jane, their families. Doc Coleman showed up with a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. Even a few townspeople appeared tentatively, as if testing the waters. Clara watched them all from her place by the fire, Sammy asleep in her lap, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. This was community. Real community. Not the false kind that Henrietta had enforced, built on fear and exclusion, but the true kind, built on shared struggle and chosen connection. It was imperfect, fragile, still forming, but it was real. 2 days before Christmas, Henrietta Morrison came to the ranch. Clara saw the familiar black carriage coming up the road and felt her stomach drop. She set down the bread dough she'd been kneading and wiped her hands. What is it? Mary asked, reading her expression. Stay inside, all of you. Clara walked out to meet the carriage alone. Henrietta stepped down slowly. She looked different, older somehow. The rigid posture had softened. The hard lines around her mouth had eased. Mrs. Hartley. Mrs. Morrison. They stood facing each other in the cold breath fogging between them. I've been thinking, Henrietta said finally, about what you said. About choices. Clara waited. I've spent 30 years building walls, convincing myself that if I was hard enough, cruel enough, perfect enough, I could outrun what I did, what I lost. Henrietta's voice wavered. But I can't outrun it. It's always there. Every time I look at a child, every time I see a young mother struggling, every time I condemn a woman for making the same choice I made. She looked down at her gloved hands. I don't know how to be different. I don't know how to stop being afraid. But I want to try. Her eyes met Clara's. I want to try. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the first person in 30 years who looked at me and saw something other than what I wanted them to see. You saw the truth, and instead of using it to destroy me, you burned it. Henrietta's voice cracked. I don't understand why, but I want to. Clara took a step closer. I did it because I know what it's like to carry shame. To believe you're worthless because of one mistake. To build walls so high you can't see over them anymore. She reached out and took Henrietta's cold hand. And I know that those walls don't protect you. They just make you lonelier. Henrietta's composure finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Real tears, not the controlled kind Clara had seen before. I'm so tired, she whispered. So tired of fighting, of being afraid, of pretending. Then stop. Clara squeezed her hand. Stop pretending. Stop fighting. Let yourself be who you really are. I don't know who that is anymore. Then find out. Start over. It's not too late. Henrietta looked at the ranch at the new barn, the house full of women she'd tried to destroy the life that had grown, despite her best efforts to crush it. Can you forgive me? She asked. After everything. Clara thought about the rock through the window, the burning barn, the months of fear and struggle, and wondering if she'd ever be safe. And she thought about the 15-year-old girl who'd given up a baby, about the walls that had formed layer by layer until there was nothing left but ice. I can try, she said honestly. One day at a time. Henrietta nodded slowly. It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning. I want to help, she said. The women you've taken in, Mary, the others. I have resources, connections. We'll see. Clara released her hand. Actions speak louder than words. Show me you've changed. Show the whole town, and then we'll talk about help. Fair enough. Henrietta straightened her spine, not the rigid posture of before, but something stronger, more real. I'll start with the general store. George should never have turned you away. I'll make sure everyone knows they're free to serve whoever they choose. That would be a good beginning. Henrietta turned back toward her carriage, then paused. The girl, she said quietly. My daughter. I'm going to try to find her, whatever it takes. Clara felt her heart squeeze. I hope you do. Henrietta climbed into her carriage and rode away. Clara watched until she disappeared around the bend, then walked back inside. The women were waiting, faces tight with worry. What happened? Mary asked. What did she want? Clara looked at them, these broken, beautiful women who'd found their way to her door, who'd trusted her, who'd built something together out of nothing but determination and hope. A second chance, she said softly. She wanted a second chance. And as she said the words, Clara realized something she'd been too afraid to believe before. Second chances weren't just possible. They were everywhere, in every moment, every choice. Every decision to love instead of hate, to forgive, instead of condemn, to build, instead of destroy. She'd found her second chance in Silas, in Sammy, in this ranch full of women who refused to give up. And maybe, just maybe, Henrietta could find hers too. Christmas morning arrived with a silence that felt like grace. Clara woke before dawn, Silas's arm heavy and warm across her waist, and lay still for a long moment, just breathing. Listening to the quiet, feeling the solid presence of the man beside her. 6 months ago, she'd been standing in the snow outside a church, begging for help that wouldn't come. 6 months ago, she'd believed she would never stop running. Now she was home. She slipped out of bed and padded to Sammy's room. He was still asleep. Star, the wooden horse, clutched against his chest, his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been when they'd first arrived in Coldwater Creek. The haunted look was gone. The flinch when strangers approached. The constant vigilance of a child who'd learned too young that the world was cruel. He was just a boy now. A happy, loved, ordinary boy. Clara pressed a kiss to his forehead and went to start the coffee. The house was full of sounds she'd come to love. Mary's soft humming from the kitchen, Elizabeth's footsteps on the stairs, Agnes's gentle cough as she settled into her chair by the fire. They'd become a family, not the kind she'd imagined as a girl, but something stronger, forged in struggle, chosen on purpose. Silas found her on the porch an hour later, watching the sun rise over the fresh snow. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Hartley." Clara smiled. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Hartley." He handed her a cup of coffee and settled beside her. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, breath fogging in the cold air. "I have something for you," Silas said finally. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box carved with delicate flowers. Clara opened it and caught her breath. Inside was a ring, simple gold warm from being held in his hand. But etched into the band were two words she could barely read through her tears. "Finally home." "Thomas made it," Silas said quietly. "I wanted you to have a real ring, one that meant something." Clara slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." Silas pulled her close. Forever and always. They stayed on the porch until Sammy came running out in his nightshirt, demanding to know if Santa had come, and the house erupted into the beautiful chaos of Christmas morning. The new year brought changes none of them had expected. Henrietta Morrison, true to her word, had begun to transform. The general store reopened its doors to Clara and anyone else who'd been blacklisted. The hotel started hiring again, without asking about marital status. Even the church, the same church that had turned Clara away, began preaching sermons about mercy and second chances. "People are confused," Sarah Jane reported during one of her visits. "They don't know what to make of it. Mrs. Morrison actually smiled at me yesterday. Smiled. I nearly fainted." "Change is hard," Clara said. "For everyone, including her." "Do you really believe she's different? After everything?" Clara thought about the woman who'd come to her ranch 2 days before Christmas. The tears that had streaked through perfect powder. The tremor in a voice that had always been so controlled. "I believe she's trying. And that's more than most people ever do." In February, Mary's baby came. It was a difficult birth. Hours of labor that left Mary exhausted and terrified. Clara held her hand through all of it, remembering her own labor with Sammy alone in a charity hospital, surrounded by strangers who looked at her with pity and judgment. Mary would never have to feel that. Not here. Not with them. The baby arrived just before dawn. A girl with her mother's auburn hair and a cry that could wake the dead. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, placing the tiny bundle in Mary's arms. Mary looked down at her daughter with tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared I couldn't do this alone." "You're not alone. You never have to be alone again." Mary named the baby Hope, and when Clara held her for the first time, she felt something shift in her chest, a door opening, a possibility she hadn't let herself consider. She found Silas in the barn that evening brushing down the horses. "I want another child." He stopped mid-stroke. "What?" "A baby. Ours." Clara's voice shook slightly. "I know it's crazy. We have so much already, Sammy, the ranch, all these women depending on us. But watching Mary today holding hope." She shook her head. "I want that. With you." Silas set down the brush and crossed to her. His hands found her waist, pulled her close. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her, long and deep and full of promise. "Then let's make a baby." Spring came slowly to Wyoming. The snow melted in patches, revealing the brown grass underneath. The creek began to run again, carrying chunks of ice toward some distant river. And on the Hartley Ranch, life continued to grow. Clara's pregnancy was confirmed in April. She told Silas first, then Sammy, who immediately began planning all the things he would teach his new brother or sister. "Horses," he said seriously. "And how to climb trees, and which berries are safe to eat. Papa taught me that." Papa. The word still made Clara's heart squeeze every time she heard it. News of the pregnancy spread through town quickly. People stopped Clara on the street to offer congratulations. Women she barely knew brought gifts, blankets, tiny clothes, jars of preserves for her cravings. "This town is different," she told Silas one night. "Really different. I can feel it." "You're different," he said. "You changed it. You and Mary and all the others. You showed people what was possible." "We showed them together." Silas smiled and pulled her closer. Together. In June, a stranger came to Coldwater Creek. Clara was working in the garden when she saw the woman walking up the road toward the ranch. Something about her made Clara stop. Set down her trowel. Stand up slowly. The woman was in her late 30s, with dark hair and nervous eyes, and a piece of paper clutched in her hand. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone." The woman's voice trembled. "A woman named Henrietta Morrison. I was told she lives in this town." Clara's heart began to pound. "She does. But what business do you have with her?" The woman looked down at the paper in her hand. "I received a letter last month from a detective agency in Denver. They said—" She swallowed hard. "They said they'd found my birth mother, that she'd been looking for me." Clara felt the world tilt. "Your birth mother?" "A woman named Hattie Jenkins. Though the letter said she goes by Henrietta Morrison now." The stranger's eyes filled with tears. "I know it sounds crazy. I've spent my whole life wondering who my real mother was, why she gave me up if she ever thought about me. And now she's here." Clara reached out and took the woman's hand. "And she's been waiting for you." She walked the stranger, whose name was Catherine, into town herself, held her hand as they approached the Morrison house, stood beside her when the door opened and Henrietta appeared. The two women stared at each other. Catherine saw a silver-haired stranger with tears streaming down her face. Henrietta saw the baby she'd given up 38 years ago, all grown up, standing on her doorstep like a miracle. "Catherine." Henrietta's voice broke on the name. "You came. You looked for me." Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "All this time I thought you didn't want me. I thought—" She couldn't finish. Henrietta pulled her into her arms, and they held each other on the porch of the Morrison house, while Clara watched with tears streaming down her own face. Some wounds took 30 years to heal, but they could still heal. They could still become something beautiful. Clara walked home slowly, her hand resting on the swell of her belly, and felt hope burning brighter than it ever had before. Summer brought abundance. The ranch thrived. The horses bred successfully, bringing in more money than they'd ever had. Mary's baby grew strong and healthy. Elizabeth found work as a bookkeeper for Thomas Brennan's forge. Agnes started teaching sewing classes to the women in town. Her failing eyesight no longer a barrier when she had students eager to learn. And Clara's belly grew round with the child she and Silas had made together. She was in the garden again when the pains started. Early, 3 weeks early, and sharp enough to steal her breath. "Silas?" She couldn't yell, could barely whisper. But somehow he heard her, came running from the barn, his face going white when he saw her doubled over. The baby. Coming. Now. The next hours were a blur of pain and fear, and Silas's steady voice telling her to breathe, to push, to hold on. Mary was there. Doc Coleman. Even Henrietta, who'd ridden out the moment she heard. "You can do this," Henrietta said, gripping Clara's hand. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met. You can do anything." And when it was over, when the pain finally stopped, and the room filled with the cry of a newborn, Clara held her daughter for the first time and felt the last broken piece of her heart slide into place. "She's beautiful," Silas breathed. He was crying. Clara had never seen him cry before. "She is." Clara looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyes already searching for light. "What should we name her?" Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Grace." Because that's what she is. That's what all of this is. Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. Grace Hartley, it's perfect. Sammy appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with wonder. Is that my sister? Come meet her. Clara held out her hand. Sammy crept closer, his whole body trembling with excitement and awe. He peered at the baby's face, touched her tiny hand with one careful finger. She's so small. You were this small once. Really? He looked up at Clara. And you kept me, even when it was hard. Clara's heart clenched. She pulled her son close with one arm, cradling her daughter with the other. I kept you because you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Because loving you taught me how to be brave. Because you, sweet boy, are the reason I'm here today. Sammy buried his face against her shoulder. I love you, Mama. I love you too, forever and always. The years that followed were full of ordinary miracles. Grace grew from infant to toddler to a fierce little girl who followed her brother everywhere and demanded to learn everything he knew. Sammy grew into a young man who carried his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. He learned to train horses, to mend fences, to work the land that would one day be his. Mary married a widower from the next town over, a gentle man who loved hope as his own. Elizabeth built a successful bookkeeping business. Agnes taught sewing to 3 generations of Coldwater Creek women before she passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. The town continued to change. New families arrived. Old prejudices faded. And when people asked about the history of Coldwater Creek, they heard stories about a woman who'd arrived with nothing and built something that changed everything. Henrietta Morrison lived another 15 years. She spent them making amends quietly, persistently, without fanfare. She and Catherine grew close, making up for decades of lost time. When Henrietta finally passed, she left her considerable fortune to a foundation for unwed mothers to give them the support she'd never had. Clara wept at her funeral. Wept for the enemy who'd become an ally. For the broken woman who'd found a way to heal. For the reminder that no one was beyond redemption. 10 years after that first Christmas in Coldwater Creek, Clara stood in the town square accepting a position she'd never imagined possible. Schoolteacher. The town needed someone to educate their children. Someone who understood struggle, who believed in second chances, who could teach young people that their circumstances didn't define their worth. Someone like Clara. Mrs. Hartley. The mayor, a new mayor younger and more progressive than his predecessor, shook her hand warmly. The children of Coldwater Creek are lucky to have you. Clara looked out at the crowd gathered to witness the ceremony. At Silas, his hair now fully gray. His smile still the same one that had made her heart skip all those years ago. At Sammy, 18, now standing tall with his arm around a pretty girl from the neighboring ranch. At Grace, 10 years old, fidgeting impatiently beside Mary and Hope. At the town that had once tried to drive her out, now welcoming her as one of its most valued citizens. I'm the lucky one, she said quietly. That night, Clara sat on the porch of the ranch with Silas, just as they had on so many nights before. The sky was full of stars. The air smelled of sage and horses and home. Do you ever think about the woman you used to be? Silas asked. The one who stepped off that stagecoach in a blizzard? Clara was quiet for a moment, remembering. The cold, the fear, the certainty that she would never be anything but unwanted. Sometimes, when I need to remember how far we've come. And what do you think? Clara looked at her husband, at this man who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, who'd stood against his whole town for a woman he barely knew, who'd spent 15 years showing her every single day that she was worth fighting for. I think she'd be proud, Clara said softly. I think if she could see us now, this house, these children, this life we've built, she'd finally believe what she could never believe back then. What's that? Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. That she deserved to be loved. That she deserved to stay. That she deserved every good thing that ever came her way. Silas pulled her closer. She did. She always did. The world just took too long to see it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, Grace was laughing at something Sammy had said. The fire crackled. The horses stamped in the barn. All the ordinary sounds of an ordinary life. But Clara knew there was nothing ordinary about it. This life had been fought for, bled for, nearly lost a dozen times before it was finally won. She thought about the woman who'd knocked on a church door in a blizzard begging for help that didn't come. About the mother who'd held her dying child and screamed at a God who seemed to have abandoned them. About the stranger who'd stood before a hostile town and refused to be ashamed. That woman had been so certain she would never find her place. So convinced that shame was permanent, that love was for other people, that she would spend her whole life running from a past she couldn't escape. But she'd been wrong. She'd found a place, found love, found a home. Not by earning it, not by proving herself worthy, but by being brave enough to stay when every instinct told her to run. By accepting help from a stubborn cowboy who refused to look away. By choosing over and over again to believe that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. The woman nobody wanted had become the woman who mattered most, not because she'd changed who she was, but because she'd finally let herself be seen. Clara closed her eyes, breathing in the peace she'd spent so long searching for. Silas. Thank you. For choosing me. For staying. He pressed a kiss to her hair. There was never any other choice. From the moment I saw you, Clara Hartley, I knew. Some things are worth fighting for. And you. His voice roughened. You were worth everything. Clara smiled in the darkness. 20 years ago, she'd been a broken woman with a sick child and 17 cents to her name. She'd believed she was worthless. Believed she deserved nothing. Now she was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a teacher. She'd built a life from ashes, changed a town, touched hundreds of lives. And it had all started with one simple choice. The choice to stay. The choice to believe she deserved love. The choice to let someone fight for her until she learned to fight for herself. Clara Hartley had spent her whole life running from who she was. But in the end, it was standing still, planting roots, building connections, letting herself be known that had finally set her free. She wasn't running anymore. She was home. And home, she finally understood, wasn't a place. It was a choice you made every single day. A choice to stay. A choice to love. A choice to believe that you were worth it. And Clara Whitfield Hartley. The woman nobody wanted, the mother who never gave up the heart of Coldwater Creek, was worth every single moment of the fight. She always had been. She just needed someone to help her see it. And now, at last, she could.